Christmas used to be my favorite time of the year. The smell of cinnamon in the air, the lights twinkling on the porch, and the feeling that for a few hours, the world felt softer, warmer. It was a time of connection, love, and togetherness. At least, it used to be. But that all began to change around 3 years ago, and last Christmas last Christmas was when the dam finally broke. And yeah, it broke right over my head. My name is Ryan. I'm 33 years old, and as I pulled into the driveway that Christmas Eve, I was nervous but hopeful. I had a bottle of wine under one arm, something nice, something aged, not the cheap stuff you grab from the grocery store. And I also had a batch of homemade cookies in hand. I'd stayed up until 100 a.m., baking them, every batch perfect, every ingredient measured just right. I even wore the red sweater my mom used to love, the one she said made me look like someone who would host a Hallmark special. I'd hoped it was a peace offering, maybe a gesture of goodwill. In the last couple of years, things had gotten tense with my family. My sister Melanie had been blaming me for not coming home enough, for being distant since Mom passed. And Aunt Dorene, well, Aunt Dorene always had something passive-aggressive to say. She always thought I was too good for the family because I moved out of town for work. But Christmas is a Christmas, right? I thought to myself, we could all set our egos aside for one night, just one night. At least, that's what I thought. I rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass, I could see some movement, hear laughter. I even saw someone peek through the curtains before quickly pulling them shut again. Then, with a heavy sigh, Aunt Dorene opened the door. She stood there, wineglass in hand, wearing that glittery reindeer sweater that somehow looked tacky even in December. She had that unmistakable look on her face, the one she reserved just for me, the one that made me feel like an intruder in my own family. "Oh," she said flatly, not even trying to hide her annoyance. "You actually showed up." I gave her a polite smile. "Merry Christmas, Aunt D." I tried to ignore the sting in her words. She glanced over her shoulder into the living room, then back at me with a deep sigh. It was the kind of sigh that made it clear I was unwelcome. "We don't want you here. Go ruin someone else's holiday." Her voice was low but sharp, like a whisper that still managed to cut right through my bones. I blinked, unsure of how to respond. My mouth opened to say something, anything, but nothing came out. All I could manage was a short breath. "I see," I said, barely above a whisper, and I meant it. I saw everything in that moment: my family, the way they had treated me, and how they had silently erased me from their lives. I turned around slowly, feeling the weight of every word they hadn't said, the weight of being dismissed, of being nothing more than a ghost at the family table. I didn't look back as I walked down the steps. My cookies, freshly baked and still warm, slipped slightly in the tray, but I steadied them with one hand. I didn't run. I didn't slam the gate. I just walked back to my car as snow began falling in fat, wet flakes, the kind that melted instantly but still carried that quiet hush, like the world itself was holding its breath. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. There was no anger yet, no sadness either, just this hollow weight in my chest. I'd driven 2 hours. I'd prepared everything: sweater, cookies, wine, and all I got was a cold rejection. It would have been easy to cry, easier still to rage at the injustice of it all, but I didn't do either. I simply whispered, "Got it," under my breath as I started the engine. The car warmed up, the heater kicking in, but I wasn't feeling any better. As I pulled out of the driveway and started heading down the road, my phone buzzed. One call, then another. I ignored them all, let them go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear it. Whatever excuse, whatever lie they'd try to tell me, none of it would change the look on Aunt Dorene's face when she spoke those words to me. None of it would erase the fact that, once again, I was the black sheep of the family. The phone kept buzzing, the tension built, and I felt the need to answer, if only out of morbid curiosity. Eventually, I picked up. "Ryan?" My dad's voice came through shakily. There was noise in the background, doors slamming, voices raised, the unmistakable sounds of a family fight. "Ryan? Where are you?" he asked. "I'm on my way home," I replied flatly. He didn't answer immediately. I could hear Melanie in the background saying something I couldn't quite make out, then muffled voices. "He's not picking up." Melanie said, "Dad, just let it go." But my dad didn't let it go. His voice was filled with urgency now. "Ryan, please come back. Something's happened." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "You need me to come back now, after your sister told me to go ruin someone else's holiday?" Dad exhaled heavily, like he was wrestling with himself. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she said that. I didn't even know you were at the door until 10 minutes ago." He paused, like he was gathering his thoughts. "Ryan, just come back, please. Something's happened." I didn't answer immediately, but I could feel the heaviness in his words, the tension, the guilt. It was all pressing on me now. I glanced into my rearview mirror and saw headlights in the distance. Someone was pulling out of the driveway. That's when I realized my dad had left the house. He'd physically left, something I'd never seen him do before. He was always the one who carved the turkey, passed the rolls, gave the toasts. He was the one who held everything together. But tonight he was leaving. I stared at the road ahead, trying to understand what had just happened. My dad had left the house, and for the first time, I wasn't sure what that meant. I couldn't stop the gnawing feeling that whatever came next wasn't going to be quiet, wasn't going to be easy, and whatever my dad was about to tell me, it was going to change everything. As I pulled into a gas station a mile away, I parked near the edge by an old dumpster. The place was mostly dark except for the flickering light above and the glow of a red lottery sign that hadn't been updated since Halloween. I cut the engine and sat there in silence, the snow settling on my windshield, forming delicate outlines like frostbite lace. A minute later, my dad's silver Subaru swerved into the lot, screeching slightly as it came to a stop next to me. The door flew open, and there he was, jacket barely zipped, one glove on, the other clenched in his fist. His face was red, but not from the cold. It was something else. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, chest heaving, his breath visible in the frigid air. I cracked the window. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, gesturing for me to get out of the car. "Please, Ryan, get out. We need to talk." "Not through the glass." I hesitated, but something in his voice made me step out. The wind bit at my skin as I pulled my collar tighter, and the snow stuck in my hair, melting down my neck. My dad stood outside my car, looking at me like he hadn't seen me in years, and maybe in some ways, he hadn't. "She told you we didn't want you there?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. "She said to go ruin someone else's holiday." I nodded. "Handled, huh?" I whispered, finishing a sentence. He flinched at my words, just barely. "Ryan," he said, his voice strained, "you have to understand. Ever since your mom passed, Dorene wormed her way into everything. Holidays, decisions. She's convinced everyone that Melanie's the golden child, and you the embarrassment." The air felt heavy between us as my dad stood there, his face contorted with guilt. He was wrestling with his words, but there was something else behind his eyes, a deep regret. I could see it, the weight of years of silence and broken promises, and it was finally breaking through the walls he had built around himself. I stood there, waiting for him to say something more, but I could tell he wasn't ready. Instead, he pulled his jacket tighter around himself and started pacing in the snow. "I didn't move. I couldn't. I should have stopped it years ago," he muttered to himself, like he was talking more to the snow than to me. His voice cracked, but he didn't look at me. "After your mom died?" Dorene filled the silence. "I let her. I should have stopped it." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew what he meant. He'd let Dorene take control. He'd let her manipulate him into thinking that keeping the peace with Melanie and the rest of the family was the right thing to do. But that peace came at a cost, and that cost was me. I clenched my fists, fighting the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I felt betrayed. I felt like I'd been treated like a second-class citizen in my own family, like nothing I did was ever enough. They had turned me into the outsider, and no one had cared enough to stop it. Dad finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of tears. "I never knew how bad it was until tonight. Until you left, I should have seen it. Ryan, I should have protected you." I shook my head slowly. "It's too late for that. Dad." My voice was steady, though my heart was anything but. "You let this happen. You let them shut me out, and you let me believe I wasn't worth fighting for." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the wind howling, the snow crunching beneath my boots, but there was nothing else. No more excuses, no more apologies. Just the raw truth hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Dad stepped closer, his eyes pleading with me. Please, Ryan, let me fix this. Let me make it right. I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd been waiting for this moment. The moment my dad would finally stand up to Dorene, to Melanie, and put things right. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure if it would make a difference. The damage had been done. Why now, I asked, my voice soft but sharp. Why come after me tonight? He hesitated, looking down at the ground, like he was ashamed of the answer. Finally, he took a deep breath and pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a folded piece of paper, carefully tucked away, like it was something sacred. I didn't move as he handed it to me. My hands were cold from the snow, but I took it from him. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. I couldn't breathe. It was a letter from my mother, written to me, just before she died. I blinked hard, my vision blurring for a moment as tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea she'd written it. I found it tonight, Dad said quietly, his voice hoarse. It was in the kitchen drawer. She left it for you. But Dorene and Melanie, they hid it from you. I didn't even know it existed until I found it tonight. I stared at the letter in disbelief. There it was, my mother's handwriting, her words, her love, the one thing that had been kept from me, the one thing I had needed to hear for so long. Dad was still talking, but I couldn't focus on his words anymore. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the letter. It was everything I had needed to hear. She had written it before she passed. And in it, she told me how proud she was of me. She had known how badly I had been treated by the family, especially Dorene. And she told me not to let them make me feel small. She told me that I wasn't the disappointment they made me out to be. I couldn't protect you from them. Dad continued, his voice breaking, but I can now. I won't let them continue to control everything. Not anymore. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in the weight of her words, letting them sink in. I had spent so long feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't matter. But my mother's letter told me the truth. She saw me. She saw everything I had done, and she loved me, no matter what anyone else said. I looked at my dad, who was standing there, tears in his eyes. She wanted me to know this, didn't she? He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. She did. She wanted you to know how much she loved you, and she wanted you to know that you weren't the problem. We all were. I felt a knot in my chest begin to loosen. The years of pain, of feeling rejected and alone, began to unravel. I had never realized how much I needed this letter until this very moment. But there was one thing left to do. You hid this from me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You let them bury this. You let them rewrite the story. And you let me believe I was the problem. Dad looked down, ashamed. I was weak. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose anyone else. Well, you lost me a long time ago, I said, my voice steady, though there was still a lump in my throat. But I'm not going to let them keep doing this to me. I'm not going to stay quiet anymore. I clenched the letter in my fist, feeling its weight, the weight of my mother's final wish, of everything she had wanted for me. I'm going back. But not for Christmas. Not to celebrate. I'm going back to confront them. I'm going to make sure they hear the truth. And I'm going to make sure they know that I'm not going to let them erase me anymore. The drive back to the house felt different. I wasn't just going back to the place where I had spent countless holidays. I wasn't the same person I was when I walked out the first time. That Ryan, the one who quietly accepted his family's treatment, had left in the snow, clutching a letter that had been hidden from him for years. This time, as I drove toward that familiar house, I wasn't just going back for closure. I was going back to expose the truth, to make sure my family saw me for who I really was, and to demand the respect I should have gotten long ago. The lights from the house shone through the trees, casting an almost cinematic glow over everything. From the outside, it looked the same as it always had, cozy, warm, inviting, but I knew better now. Beneath the surface, things were rotten. I was about to pull the curtain back, and I didn't know what would happen next. When I parked in the driveway, I didn't hesitate. I took a deep breath, looked at the letter one last time, and grabbed my jacket. This was it. No going back. I could see the warmth from the living room spilling out into the yard. The same chandelier that had always hung over the dinner table, the one my mom had loved so much, still sparkled from within, but the image felt different now, like it was all a facade, a stage set for a play I'd never been invited to, one where I wasn't even a character. I stepped out of the car and made my way to the door. It creaked as I approached, and before I could even reach it, I saw Aunt Dorene standing in the hallway. Her arms were crossed tightly, lips pursed like she was waiting for a confrontation. She looked as if she had been rehearsing some big speech, but I wasn't going to let her control this moment. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Look who's back." I didn't respond to her. I stepped past her, ignoring the way she stared at me with disdain. I wasn't here for her. I wasn't here for any of them. I was here to be heard. As I walked through the door, every eye in the room turned toward me. My cousins, my uncles, my dad, everyone had stopped whatever they were doing to stare. Melanie, mid-bite of a potato, froze. Uncle Joe paused mid-sip of his wine. Even the dog, who had been quietly chewing on something under the table, stopped in its tracks and looked up. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. As I stood in the doorway, I could feel the tension in the room, and for a moment, I just let it hang there, letting them stew in it. This wasn't about me asking for forgiveness. This wasn't about mending the rift. This was about the truth, and I wasn't going to let it be buried any longer. I took a deep breath and held up the letter from my mother. "This," I said slowly, "was buried in a drawer, hidden from me." I saw Dorene shift uncomfortably in the hallway, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. "That's private," she said sharply. "You had no right to bring that out." "No," I cut in, my voice firm. "You had no right. She wrote this to me, not to you, not to Melanie, to me." I looked over at Melanie, who was now sitting rigidly on the couch, eyes darting between me and the letter. "And you kept it from me." Melanie stood up quickly, half defiant, half uncomfortable. "Ryan, you don't even know the full story," she said, her voice defensive. "That letter, Mom was sick when she wrote it. She wasn't thinking straight." I took a step forward, my eyes fixed on hers. "She was thinking clearly enough to say I was being shut out, that you were letting Dorene treat me like a mistake, that Dad needed to step up, and so did you." I paused, watching her face twist with unease. I think she saw the truth long before I did. Aunt Dorene stepped into the room now, her eyes cold, narrowing. "Maybe that's because every time you come back, you bring drama," she said bitterly. "We've done just fine without you." "Right," I said, nodding. "Exactly. That's why you made sure this letter never reached me, because deep down, you knew the truth. You knew she didn't agree with how you've been running this family. She saw you for what you are." Dorene's jaw clenched, and she took a slow sip of her wine, like she was trying to calm herself. "This letter doesn't change reality," she muttered, trying to deflect. "We had to keep things together after your mother passed. We needed order." I scoffed. "You mean control," I said, meeting her gaze. My dad stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger for the first time in years. "No," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You took control. Dorene, I let you. And hiding that letter, that's on you." The table was dead silent. My cousins were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. Uncle Joe finally cleared his throat, but no one spoke. "Enough," my dad said. His voice was quiet now, but it held a certain finality to it. "I'm rewriting the will, effective immediately." I could see Melanie's face go pale as she turned to look at my dad. "What? No, Dad, you can't." "I can," he said firmly, interrupting her. "I've had enough. Ryan deserves to be treated with respect. He deserves to have a say in this family. Dorene, Melanie, you've lost my trust. You've manipulated me for far too long." Melanie's eyes were wide with disbelief, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. She knew what my dad was saying was the truth. I wasn't done. "Though, you both need to read this letter," I said, my voice steady but filled with conviction. I handed it to Dorene, who looked at it like it was a foreign object. "Read it, really read it, and then ask yourself how someone could justify hiding it from me." I didn't stay to see the fallout. I didn't need to. I had already said what needed to be said. As I turned to leave, I heard my dad's voice behind me. "Wait," he said, "before you go." I turned around slowly, watching as my dad walked over to the table, picked up his wine glass and raised it slightly. "I think there's one more toast we need to make." I didn't move. "To my son," he said loudly. his voice carrying in the stillness of the room, the one person in this room who didn't pretend everything was fine while letting rot fester under the tablecloth. He paused, his eyes meeting mine, to the only one here who still knows what family should mean. And with that, he set the glass down. No one clapped. No one echoed his words. It wasn't meant to be a celebration. Not really. It was the truth. And for the first time, I felt it. The weight of it. The freedom. I walked back out the door, my head held high, feeling something shift in me. A storm was brewing, and it was only just beginning. The snow had begun to fall heavier as I stepped out the door and into the cold, crisp air. It was as though the world itself was taking a deep breath. My heart was pounding, adrenaline still buzzing through me. The truth had been unleashed, and now there was no turning back. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing next, but the weight of everything I had just said and everything that had happened in that house was still settling over me like a fog. I wasn't sure how I felt just yet. There was relief, yes, but also a deep ache. After all these years, I had finally taken control of the narrative. I wasn't the person they had made me out to be. I started the engine and pulled away from the house, the light from the porch fading in my rearview mirror. The world was empty, quiet, but the noise in my head was deafening. The aftermath was only just beginning. As I drove down the snowy roads, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about my mom's letter, her final wish. She had been the only one who had truly seen me, the only one who had known the truth about my place in this family, and now it was too late for anyone else to rewrite that history. But the fact that they had tried to the fact that they had manipulated me into thinking I was the problem had to be confronted. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about setting things right. It was about finally standing up for myself and demanding that my family see me for who I truly was. And even though the house was behind me, I knew that I wasn't finished. I parked the car at the edge of the lake. It was peaceful here. Just the soft sound of the wind sweeping over the frozen surface. I needed space to breathe, to think, to get away from the mess I'd just walked away from, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling of being caught in a whirlwind. I sat in the car for a while, staring at the lake, watching the gentle ripples in the ice. The phone in my pocket buzzed repeatedly, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to deal with anything yet, not until I could gather my thoughts. About an hour later, I got out of the car, stretching my legs as I walked along the frozen shore. The moonlight made the landscape look unreal, as if everything were coated in a thick layer of snow, untouched. There was something calming about it, but there was also something about this moment that felt like the calm before the storm. I wasn't sure how my family would react to what had happened. I wasn't sure what the fallout would look like or how long it would take to repair everything. I didn't even know if I wanted to fix it. Maybe I didn't need to. Maybe this was the final chapter for me. After all these years, I had found my voice. I had made my stand. The next morning, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Melanie. I hesitated before reading it. I knew what it was going to say, a half-hearted apology, an excuse. I wasn't interested in hearing it. I tapped the screen, opening the message. Sure enough, it was exactly what I expected. Ryan, we need to talk. I saw what you posted. The letter. I didn't read all of it, but what you're doing, this isn't helping. You're embarrassing the whole family. Please, let's work this out. I stared at the screen for a moment. She didn't get it. She never would. Melanie had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was the one who had always had the support, the attention. And now that the truth was out, now that the cracks in their perfect little narrative had been exposed, she was scrambling. But I wasn't about to get drawn into her game anymore. I deleted the message. Instead, I opened my email. I had been waiting for this moment, for the moment when I could finally send my message to everyone who had been a part of that Christmas dinner, to make sure that they all knew the truth. The letter from my mother had given me the clarity I needed, and now, it was time to set the record straight. I composed my email carefully. I didn't need to be vindictive. I didn't need to tear anyone down, but I did need to make sure they all knew what had happened, what they had tried to do, what they had been hiding from me for so long. The email was simple but powerful. Subject: the truth. Hello everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm writing this to share something that's been kept from me for a long time. I know things have been strained between us. And after what happened last night, I think it's time for the truth to come out. Last night, at Christmas dinner, I was met with hostility. Aunt Dorene's words, her attitude, the way she made it clear I wasn't welcome. It wasn't the first time I've felt like an outsider in this family, but this time, I won't stay silent. There's a letter my mother wrote to me before she passed. It was meant for me, and yet it was kept from me hidden, ignored. Because Dorene, Melanie, and others decided it wasn't important enough for me to know. But it is important. It's everything I needed to hear, and it changes everything. She was proud of me. She knew how I was treated, and she wanted me to know that I wasn't the disappointment they tried to make me feel like. I've spent years feeling like an outsider, like I wasn't good enough to be part of this family, but no more. I'm done letting you rewrite my story. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not begging for acceptance. What I'm asking for is truth. I will not be erased anymore. I hope this message opens your eyes. Sincerely, Ryan. I hit send, and for a moment, I just stared at the screen. My heart was racing, but I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was done. The truth was out there, and no matter how they tried to spin it, no matter how hard they tried to deflect, it couldn't be taken back. The fallout started soon after. My phone buzzed, but I didn't answer. I knew it was them. I knew they would be trying to make excuses, but I wasn't interested in listening anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was on the right path. I was no longer the son they could manipulate. I was no longer the family member they could ignore. I was done hiding. Oh, 8 seconds, explosive hook. You won't believe what happened when I showed up for Christmas dinner. And my aunt looked me in the eye and said, "We don't want you here." 8:25 seconds, rapid story tease. I was ready to mend things with my family. I brought gifts, cookies, even wore the sweater Mom used to love. But when I knocked on the door, Aunt Dorene welcomed me with nothing but disdain. She practically shoved me out of the house before I could even say a word. But here's where it gets crazy. My dad, who's always been the peacemaker, finally told me something that shattered everything. A letter from my mother, one that was hidden from me for years, had been kept in a drawer. Now, I was about to walk back in, not to beg for forgiveness, but to confront them all armed with the truth. 25:45 seconds, CTA bridge to long form. But that's just the beginning. The full revenge was so genius, I had to make a complete breakdown. What happened next shook my family to its core. You won't believe how I exposed them, and what happened after. Full story in my latest video, link in bio. But tell me, what would you do if your own family tried to erase you? 40 to 60 seconds, cliffhanger question. Would you forgive them, or would you take your revenge? 8 seconds, explosive hook. You won't believe what happened when I showed up for Christmas dinner, and my aunt looked me in the eye and said, "We don't want you here." 8:25 seconds, rapid story tease. I was ready to mend things with my family. I brought gifts, cookies, even wore the sweater Mom used to love. But when I knocked on the door, Aunt Dorene welcomed me with nothing but disdain. She practically shoved me out of the house before I could even say a word. But here's where it gets crazy. My dad, who's always been the peacemaker, finally told me something that shattered everything. A letter from my mother, one that was hidden from me for years, had been kept in a drawer. Now, I was about to walk back in, not to beg for forgiveness, but to confront them all armed with the truth. 25 to 45 seconds, CTA bridge to long form. But that's just the beginning. The full revenge was so genius, I had to make a complete breakdown. What happened next shook my family to its core. You won't believe how I exposed them, and what happened after. Full story in my latest video, link in bio. But tell me, what would you do if your own family tried to erase you? 45-60 seconds, a cliffhanger question. Would you forgive them? Or would you take your revenge story too? The air in the house was thick with the scent of my mother's ever-present potpourri, a strange mix of cinnamon and dried roses. It tried to mask something I couldn't quite place, but it had always felt suffocating. It was my 30th birthday, and I, Adam, stood in the kitchen of the same house I'd grown up in, basting a lasagna. It felt like a cruel joke. After all these years, all these sacrifices, I should have been celebrating with my family, but instead, I was once again invisible. Mom, ever the perfectionist, believed in appearances everything had to be just right. the perfectly manicured lawn, the immaculate living room, and the posts on social media showcasing our happy family. Yet behind the glossy exterior was a truth that no one ever acknowledged, least of all me. The moment my younger brother, Ethan, was born, the spotlight shifted. Ethan, the natural charmer, always the star athlete, was the one who received all the praise. And I was the quiet, unremarkable one, always reading books or working on my computer projects, silently hoping to get noticed. But that never happened. Mom's sighs became my soundtrack, the sighs that followed every conversation I had with her about my passion for coding. "That's nice, Adam," she'd say dismissively as if I was just a nuisance. Not her son, my father, who was never one for many words, showed his love only for Ethan. Every handshake, every proud moment went to him. And I was just a second thought, a footnote in the family's narrative. Growing up was never about fun or adventure, it was about duty. I worked odd jobs to pay my way through college, while Ethan sailed through on the back of my parents' support, never having to struggle. I picked a career path not because it was my dream, but because it was practical. It was the job I thought would make them proud of me, make them finally see my worth. But even after all those years of quietly paying the bills, fixing broken pipes, and quietly transferring money for repairs, nothing changed. They never looked up. No amount of money, no amount of effort seemed enough. And now, on my 30th birthday, I was hoping this year might be different. I had even splurged. I bought my father an expensive watch he'd admired in passing, and for my mother, I picked up a designer handbag she had hinted at for months. I spent hours in the kitchen making her favorite lasagna from scratch, pouring my love into every step. I thought maybe this time, they would see me. Maybe this time, they'd finally recognize everything I had done for them, everything I had given up for them. But as dinner progressed, it became clear this was going to be just like every other year. Ethan arrived late, as usual, and as always, all eyes turned to him. He regaled everyone with exaggerated tales of his latest business success while I, the host, faded into the background. Their smiles were polite. Their attention was always on Ethan. I couldn't even get a real conversation out of my parents. Then, after dinner, my mother stood up, tapping a fork against a champagne glass. "We have a very special gift for our dear Adam," she announced with a flourish, her voice dripping with false sweetness. A strange feeling washed over me, a flutter of hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I watched as my father, with a rare grin, handed me a small, velvet-covered box. My heart beat faster. Could this be the moment? I opened it, and inside sat a small golden trophy. "Most useless son," it said, etched into the base in bold, black letters. I stared at it, frozen, as my mother's smirk grew. "You've always been our biggest disappointment," she said, her voice coated in venom. The room was silent for a beat, but then Ethan burst out laughing, his voice echoing around the room. The laugh wasn't just loud, it was cruel, mocking, and it hit me harder than any insult ever could. I felt something in my chest snap, but it wasn't anger. No, it was something colder, something more final. It was the realization that this was the last straw. I was never going to get the approval I so desperately sought. I was never going to be enough. I tried to laugh, to brush it off, but it was hollow. Very funny. "Mom and Dad," I managed, my voice shaking. I placed the trophy back in the box, my fingers trembling. It wasn't funny. It wasn't a joke. It was a statement. They had finally shown me exactly what they thought of me. And in that moment, I made a decision. I excused myself from the table, my mind already elsewhere. The room's chatter, their laughter, the smell of lasagna that had once promised warmth and connection, it all felt so distant now. I walked into the home office, my steps calm, deliberate. I opened my banking app, located the line item for their mortgage, and transferred the money for the next payment. I paused, my thumb hovering over the confirm button. This was it, the final act, the last bit of duty I had given them. I tapped it, and with that, I had officially closed the door on them. No more. I walked back into the dining room, my expression blank. "Dinner's ready," I said, my voice cold. I grabbed my coat, forced a smile, and walked out. That was the last time I'd ever walk out of that house as their son. The cool night air hit my face as I drove away, the weight lifting off my chest with each passing mile. When I reached a quiet side street, I stopped the car, I blocked their numbers, I unfollowed them on social media, I severed all ties, and as I did, I felt a strange peace wash over me, mixed with a hollow sadness. They were gone, but so was the part of me that craved their approval. It was over. And for the first time, I could breathe. The first few days after I cut ties with my family felt eerily quiet. The phone that once buzzed incessantly with their demands, their complaints, their manipulations was now silent. It was unsettling at first. In the past, their voices had been the backdrop to my life, a constant hum in the background. But now, without them, the silence seemed almost too loud, too all-encompassing. I didn't know what to do with the stillness at first. The days blurred together. I woke up late, went for long walks by the beach, spent hours tinkering with my personal coding projects. It was the first time in years that I had felt like I was doing something for myself, not out of obligation, not to earn love, but because I actually wanted to. Therapy had always been something I put off. I never thought I needed it, or maybe I just didn't want to face the truth. But now, with nothing to distract me, I found myself sitting in a small, black, quiet office across from a woman named Dr. Miller. Her office smelled of fresh linen and light lavender, so different from the stifling, suffocating air I'd grown used to in my childhood home. I began to unravel the years of emotional manipulation I had endured. It was a slow process, painful, uncomfortable, and sometimes terrifying, but it was also freeing. Dr. Miller's gentle guidance helped me understand things I'd never even considered. Terms like codependency, narcissistic tendencies, and emotional blackmail began to take shape in my mind. I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. All those years of feeling inadequate, all the guilt I'd carried, it was real. It wasn't just me being overly sensitive. My parents and brother had constructed a reality in which I was always the problem. They had made sure that I never felt truly seen, that I always doubted my worth. It was during one of these sessions that I realized just how deep the manipulation ran. I wasn't just a passive participant, I was an active one, too. Feeding into the cycle because I was desperate to feel needed, to feel like I mattered. I spent years trying to be the good son, the one who didn't complain, the one who always stepped up, always sacrificed, hoping one day it would pay off. But it never did. It was a trap I'd willingly walked into, and it had taken me far too long to escape. When I wasn't in therapy, I started reconnecting with old friends. Some of them had always seen through my family's facade, but I had pushed them away over the years. Sarah, my old college friend who had become a lawyer, was a lifeline. She was the first person who listened to my story without judgment. When I finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she simply said, "You were being used, Adam, plain and simple." Plain and... Her words felt like a bomb exploding inside me. Suddenly, everything I'd been carrying, the years of confusion, the guilt, the frustration started to make sense. She was right. I had been used. All those times I had bailed them out of financial trouble, all the years I had been their emotional crutch, it was never about love. It was about control. Sarah helped me see that I didn't owe them anything. She was the first person to truly ask me, "What do you want, Adam?" I had never been asked that before. It wasn't about what my parents wanted for me or what they thought I should do. It was about me. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about my own happiness, my own desires. I wasn't just a bystander in my own life. I was the one who could control my future. Over the next few weeks, I felt a growing sense of freedom. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned long ago. I spent entire afternoons coding just for fun, not for work. I explored hiking trails in the vast state parks of California, the cool air filling my lungs as I walked through forests and up mountains. The peace I found in nature was something I had never experienced before. The constant tension I used to feel like a knot in my stomach began to loosen. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was breathing, truly breathing, without the weight of my family's expectations on my shoulders. But just as I was starting to rebuild, the calls started again. At first, it was just David. His usual smooth voice was gone. Instead, there was panic, a new edge of desperation in his words. "Mike, it's David. Listen, Mom and Dad, they're in trouble. The house, it's about to be foreclosed. The bank's really pressing them. Can you help? Please, man, this is serious." His voice cracked toward the end, and it hit me. This wasn't the confident older brother I knew. This was someone who was drowning, someone who was seeing everything they'd built the facade of success fall apart. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I just listened. The old me would have jumped at the chance to help. I would have felt guilty for even a second, then immediately rushed to their aid. But not now. The new me was different. I felt nothing. There was no rush of guilt, no old desire to save them. There was only a cold clarity. I deleted the voicemail, then I blocked his number. The next day, my mother called. Her voice was sharp, angry. "How could you do this to your own family? We've always been there for you. We need you. You're the one who's supposed to help." Adam. Her words hit me like a slap, but this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't abandon you. "Mom," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I stopped enabling you. There's a difference." I felt the tension on the other end of the line. She didn't know what to say to that. Her silence spoke volumes, and then she hung up. Then came my father's call. His voice, though not as hysterical as my mother's, was full of that same old manipulation. "Adam, this is ridiculous. We've given you everything. We've always supported you. And now you're going to leave us to lose everything. You can't just walk away from your family." I didn't respond to his guilt trip. Instead, I set the terms. "I'm willing to talk, Dad, but only if you agree to a public apology. A real apology for everything. And I want a full, transparent accounting of all the family finances. All of it." There was a long silence on the other end. I could practically hear him wrestling with his own pride, with the years of control they had exerted over me. Finally, he agreed, but I could hear the reluctant defeat in his voice. They were desperate, and I knew it. But even then, I wasn't ready to go back. I wasn't ready to just fix everything with a few words or a token gesture. No, I needed more. The truth needed to come out. All of it. I called Sarah, and together, we began a subtle but strategic campaign on social media. I started sharing posts, quotes about the truth always coming out, about the cost of hidden sacrifices, about the emotional toll of enabling toxic behavior. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The message was clear, and the algorithms did the rest. Slowly but surely, the attention began to shift. Friends of friends, distant relatives, acquaintances, everyone started to see the cracks in the carefully constructed facade. The perfect family was no longer perfect. It was crumbling, and I couldn't have been more relieved. The weeks following my decision to sever ties with my family were a whirlwind of emotions, some new, others all too familiar. At first, the silence from them felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't consumed by their demands, their expectations, their manipulations. I wasn't their emotional ATM anymore. I wasn't the person they could rely on to fix everything when it fell apart. It was liberating, but also disorienting. I spent more time with Aunt Carol, my mother's estranged sister, who had always been a beacon of understanding in my otherwise cold family. Carol had lived life on her own terms, and she didn't mince words. She wasn't afraid to tell me the hard truths that I had long avoided. In the midst of my new life of freedom, she was one of the few people who offered unconditional support. It was Carol who first told me about the inheritance. My mother had kept it a secret for years. Carol and I sat in her small, uncluttered kitchen, sipping tea. Her eyes were dark, but they held a kind of fierce warmth. "Michael," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "I need to tell you something, and it's something your parents have kept buried for decades." She paused, and I could see the deep breath she was taking, like she was preparing to face a long-held fear. I had no idea what was coming, but Carol's face was grim, and it immediately set my heart racing. "Your parents came into a lot of money," she said. "A trust fund? From my side of the family, from my mother, enough to set them up for life, to ensure they wouldn't ever have to worry about money. But instead of securing their future, they squandered it. They used it to keep up appearances, money for David's businesses, his trips to Europe, his private schooling, all while making you feel like you were the problem. They were terrified of losing the image of the perfect family." Her words landed like a bombshell. All this time, I thought they were struggling, that they needed me to keep things afloat, but in reality, they had been living off a lie, a carefully constructed facade. I was the one left in the background, quietly picking up the pieces, while David the golden child was handed everything. I felt sick. For years, I had been the one to step in, covering for their mistakes, believing I was doing the right thing. I'd been so desperate to earn their love, their approval, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. My mother and father didn't need my help. They needed me to be their pawn, to play the role they had created for me. And all the while, David's life was being funded by my sacrifices. Carol continued, showing me old bank statements, faded letters, and even photographs of my mother's attempts to keep up with the successful family image. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. The more I saw, the more I realized how deeply they had manipulated me and how much they had kept from me. The bitterness that had slowly built up inside me began to boil over. My entire life, I had been an accessory to their lies, to their need for control. David's voice had been a constant in my life, but now it felt like a distant echo. When he called again, it was full of panic, of desperation. "Mike, it's David. Listen, I'm not sure what's going on, but Mom and Dad, this is bad. Really bad. The bank's about to foreclose on the house. You've got to come back. They're going to lose everything. Please. I don't know what to do." His voice cracked, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. The old me would have scrambled to help, to rescue them from their self-inflicted mess, but this time, all I felt was a cold, unwavering resolve. I wasn't going back to fix things. Not for them, not for David. The world they had built was theirs to destroy. It wasn't mine to fix anymore. I didn't respond to David's call. Instead, I deleted the voicemail and once again blocked his number. I knew that the more I distanced myself, the more they would scramble, but I couldn't go back. They had made their choices. Now, they would face the consequences. That night, I sat with Sarah, my lawyer friend. She was a rock in the chaos of everything. Her no-nonsense attitude a balm to my wounded soul. "This is it," I told her, a quiet, steady resolve filling my chest. "I can't keep going like this. I'm done being their scapegoat, their fixer. I need to get my truth out." Sarah nodded, her eyes sharp with understanding. "You're right. It's time." The next few days were a blur of planning. I contacted Aunt Carol, who had already gathered a wealth of evidence, bank statements, letters, and other documents that proved what I had suspected all along. My parents had been living a lie, one they had carefully crafted for decades. Now, it was time to tear down that illusion. I started posting cryptic messages on social media, not directly targeting anyone, but sending out subtle signals that something was wrong. I shared stories about the hidden sacrifices, the weight of keeping a family together under false pretenses. Slowly, the truth began to seep out. It wasn't just me who had been in the dark. Many of our distant relatives, those who had always admired the perfect family from afar, began to question what had been hidden. David, ever the image-conscious golden child, noticed the change. His social media posts grew more frantic, more cryptic. He began posting vague laments about ungrateful family members and betrayal, but the cracks in his facade were becoming more and more visible. The steady stream of money I had provided, the silent pillar that had propped up their lives, had suddenly disappeared, and David couldn't handle it. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that the truth wasn't just about money, it was about control, about the power my parents and David had over me. They had made me feel like I was the one who owed them, like I was the one who had failed them. But the truth was, they had used me. They had manipulated me into believing that their problems were mine to solve, that their failures were my responsibility. The foreclosure notices started showing up. The letters, once neatly tucked away in envelopes, now sat in plain sight on the kitchen counter. As if taunting my parents, I could see the stress in their eyes, the crack in their once perfect smile. They were losing control of their image, and they didn't know how to fix it. For the first time in years, I felt no sympathy. David's calls became more frequent, more desperate. "Mike, please, we can't do this without you. Mom's losing it. She's not sleeping. She can't handle this. You're the only one who can fix it." But I didn't answer. I let him drown in the mess they had created. It wasn't my mess anymore, not my responsibility. The walls they had built around themselves were beginning to collapse, piece by piece. It wasn't just their house at risk anymore. It was their reputation, their carefully constructed image. And that was a battle I couldn't fight for them. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the final confrontation. My parents called for a family meeting. They wanted to talk. They wanted to fix things. But I knew the truth. They wanted to make me feel guilty, to rope me back into their world of manipulation. They had no intention of acknowledging their actions, no intention of taking responsibility. It was the same old story, dressed up in different words. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. I arrived at the meeting, flanked by Aunt Carol and Sarah. The tension in the room was thick, like a heavy blanket that smothered every word. My parents sat at the table, looking like they had just walked off a set of an old soap opera, grim, desperate, but still clinging to their need for control. David, sitting between them, fidgeted nervously, unable to meet my eyes. My mother sneered, "So you wanted to talk? Well, we're listening." I looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes, and took a deep breath. I'm done. I'm done being your scapegoat, done being your ATM, done with all of it. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then, I continued. I've got proof. Proof of everything you've been hiding for years. You've used me. You've manipulated me. And now, it's time to face the consequences. Their faces turned pale. My father's jaw tightened. David's hands clenched into fists. I pulled out my phone and played the audio recordings. The damning evidence. The phone calls where David openly admitted to using me. The text messages where they discussed their manipulation of me. It was all there, undeniable, irrefutable. I let the silence linger. Their perfect world, their gilded image, had just been shattered. And I wasn't going to let them rebuild it. The truth was out. And I was finally free. Story 3. It had always been the same. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with my mother's lilac perfume, a comforting scent, one I associated with home back when home didn't feel like a carefully crafted illusion, but that illusion shattered when I, Michael Davies, 32 years old, found myself standing in front of the house I thought I'd paid for, only to be thrown out by the very people I had sacrificed everything for. It all started with the house, a large 2-story colonial in a leafy suburb of Boston. It was the physical manifestation of everything I had worked for years of late nights at my tech job, skipping vacations, ignoring my own dreams, all to make sure they could keep the house. When I was younger, I believed that love was something earned through sacrifice, that family was about unconditional loyalty and providing was the ultimate devotion. I grew up in a house that looked perfect on the outside, but behind the scenes, things were far from ideal. My parents, Martha and Robert, were the perfect image of suburban charm. Martha with her polished blonde hair and perfectly put-together demeanor, Robert with his booming laugh and knack for making friends at the country club. To the world, they were the epitome of what a family should be. But beneath the surface, there was another story, a story of manipulation, financial strain, and emotional distance. And in the middle of all of it was me, the reliable son, the good son, the one who could fix problems, pay bills, and sacrifice. My younger brother, Ryan, was the opposite. He was charming, carefree, and always managing to scrape by without really trying. And yet, he was always the one who got praised. Ryan never had to work a day in his life. Whether it was his endless schemes or artistic endeavors, my parents funded him without hesitation. I, on the other hand, was the one they counted on to keep everything together. Every loan, every bill, every time the house needed repairs, I was the one who paid. And my parents, they never asked. Instead, they simply expected. Ryan has such a sensitive soul. Michael, my mother would say, her voice syrupy sweet, as if that explained everything. You're good with numbers. You understand sacrifices, don't you? I didn't know it at the time, but those words were a manipulation. The constant reminder that I had a duty to support them, to be their financial safety net, was nothing but a leash, and I was too blind to see it. I was too desperate for their approval, for some kind of recognition, to stop and think. I sacrificed my own dreams for them. I sacrificed the backpacking trip through Europe I'd always wanted, the apartment I could have had, the life I could have built for myself. All of it went into paying off their mortgage. I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought that eventually, My efforts would be rewarded. But that was the biggest lie I'd been living. When I finally made the last mortgage payment, it was supposed to be my moment of triumph. I had imagined my father's proud handshake, my mother's teary-eyed thanks. The house was theirs, and it was mine too, or so I thought. The truth, however, was more insidious. The relief of paying off the house quickly dissolved into the same financial drain that had defined our relationship. Every time they needed something money for Ryan's latest venture, an unexpected repair on the house, a supposed medical emergency, they came to me. I was the family ATM, endlessly supplying without ever being acknowledged for the sacrifice I made. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when I realized that no matter how much I gave, I was always overlooked. Ryan received endless praise for his fleeting hobbies and failed startups, while I, the one who had kept them afloat for years, was quietly ignored. They'd invite Ryan to family dinners, fawn over his latest purchases, and yet I, who had literally paid off the roof over their heads, was treated like I didn't even exist. It was as if I was just a tool in their carefully constructed narrative. The family was always about appearances, about the perfect image they projected to the outside world, and I, it seemed, was expendable once the mortgage was paid. Then, when the inevitable happened, when I lost my job, I thought I could go home. The house was supposed to be a symbol of all the things I had done for them. I thought it was my right to ask for help, but the second I stepped through the door, I realized how wrong I was. "Mom, Dad, I lost my job today," I said, my voice shaky as I stood in their kitchen, the smell of pot roast filling the air. It was meant to be a comforting aroma, but to me, it now reeked of denial. I was hoping, maybe desperately, for some sympathy, some acknowledgement of all I had done for them. The look on their faces, cold. The words that came out of my mother's mouth were a slap in the face. "That's unfortunate. Michael, but what does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice devoid of warmth. And then came the blow. "You helped us out." "Michael, there's a difference," she scoffed, clearly irritated. "You're just a benefactor. Michael, not our son." I was dumbstruck. I had been their son, their financial lifeline, for so long, but in that moment, I wasn't family. I was just a resource. Ryan, standing in the doorway, added his 2 cents. "Yeah, Mike, you helped. Big deal. That doesn't mean you own it," he said, his voice laced with condescension. The words they threw at me were a crushing blow. They dismissed me, as if all the years of sacrifice meant nothing. "You're just an ATM, Michael," Martha sneered. And then, the ultimate humiliation. "Get out, now," Robert shouted. "You hear me? Get out of my house or I'll call the police." I was stunned, my body trembling as I absorbed the shock. This house, this place that I had worked so hard to protect, had become a prison. The betrayal was unbearable. I asked to see the house deed, desperate for any proof that I had a right to the house, something that could validate the years I had given. But when they handed me the papers, my name wasn't on them. I wasn't even listed. The truth was undeniable. The house was never mine. It had all been a lie. I stood there, trembling, feeling the weight of a decade's worth of emotional manipulation collapse around me. I had been a fool to believe in the family I thought I had. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to take this anymore. The cold night air hit my face like a slap as I stepped out of the house. My heart, still racing, pounded in my chest. My feet seemed to move on their own, and I didn't look back. I couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw, but as I stood there in the street, my mind began to clear. A new feeling surged through me, one that I hadn't recognized in years: anger, but not the kind that paralyzes you. This was a focused, clean rage, a surge of determination. I didn't cry, not even a little, not for them, not anymore. The familiar hum of my phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of the numbness. I pulled it out, already knowing who it would be. "Ryan," I answered with a heavy sigh. "Yeah." His voice was thin, pleading. "Mike, what the hell is going on? You can't just leave like that. This is crazy." I didn't have the energy for his usual theatrics. "You don't get it, do you? You've been playing your game, and I've been paying the price. But I'm done." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him shuffling around. Maybe he was sitting up now, realizing the magnitude of what was happening. Mike, we're family. We can fix this. Family? Really? I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the silence of the street. Family doesn't kick you out for trying to help. They don't throw you away once you've outlived your usefulness. I'm not your bank anymore. Ryan, not your ATM, not your fool. He stammered something, but I hung up before he could continue. I was done. But there was something more I needed to do, something I had ignored for far too long. I drove aimlessly for hours, just letting my mind process everything that had happened. By the time I found myself at a small cafe, the sun was beginning to rise. My thoughts were still a mess, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity. It was about taking control of the situation. I picked up my phone and called Sarah. Sarah Jenkins had been a friend from college, and now she was a sharp, no-nonsense real estate lawyer in Boston. She had always been the type of person to cut straight to the chase, no small talk, just the facts. She listened to my story with an unsettling calmness, offering nothing but understanding. But when I finished, I expected her to offer advice. She didn't. Instead, she said something that changed everything. This isn't just about the house, Michael. This is about them stripping away your dignity, your self-worth. It's time to fight for yourself. We can do this. You have a case, a strong one. Her words cut through the fog of confusion in my mind. I wasn't just some passive victim anymore. I wasn't going to stand by and watch them destroy my life any longer. I would fight, but not with anger, with justice, with facts. By the time I pulled into Sarah's office, I had made up my mind. I wasn't just going to reclaim the house. I was going to expose the truth. I was going to make sure they never manipulated anyone again. Sarah's office was sleek, modern, and minimalist, a sharp contrast to the emotional chaos I had just left behind. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the change in me: calm, determined, and ready. Sarah greeted me with a firm handshake. Her eyes were clear, focused. She knew exactly what needed to be done. "Okay, Michael," she said, sitting me down across from her desk. "This isn't going to be easy, but we've got everything we need. We're not just proving you paid for the house. We're going after them for unjust enrichment. They took advantage of your contributions, and we're going to make sure they pay for it." I nodded. I had been living in denial for so long. I had been a fool, thinking that paying off their house would bring me some kind of approval, some kind of love. But now, it was clear. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to stay small, to stay invisible, so they could keep using me. Sarah started going over the documents we needed to build our case. Bank statements from the past decade showed every transfer, every significant payment I had made directly to their mortgage. There were old emails, some surprisingly detailed, where my parents had acknowledged my contributions. And then there were the faded holiday cards from Robert, scrawled in his sprawling hand. "Thanks, Michael. You've secured our future in this house. We couldn't have done it without you." It was all there: the proof, the receipts, the betrayal. Every document, every email felt like a nail in the coffin of the family I had once believed in. It wasn't just exploitation, it was calculated fraud, and I had the evidence to prove it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, phone calls, and strategy. Sarah and I worked tirelessly, gathering every scrap of evidence we could find. Meanwhile, my parents, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued their charade of a perfect family. Ryan, now emboldened by my absence, posted endless pictures of their happy family life on social media. They didn't know I was watching, didn't know I could see through the cracks. It sickened me, but I was done. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Then, the discovery came: something I hadn't expected, but something that would change everything. Sarah and I were going over some older documents when I found it. My hands trembled as I stared at the legal papers in front of me. A will, an old one, and not just any will, a property agreement that disinherited me. It was dated 5 years ago, long before I paid off the mortgage. But the most shocking part, it specifically granted Ryan everything, including the house. I had been played from the very beginning. My heart raced as I processed the revelation. This wasn't just about financial manipulation anymore. This was about them actively plotting against me. They had planned for me to be nothing more than a financial safety net while they built their perfect image around Ryan. And the truly insidious part, they had taken out a second mortgage on the house after I paid off the first. They used that money to fund Ryan's failing ventures, to keep up the facade. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. The rage I had been feeling for days grew into something much more focused. This wasn't just about reclaiming the house anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. I sat in the quiet of Sarah's office, the weight of the discovery still pressing down on my chest. The papers, the legal jargon, and the deceit, they were all pieces of a puzzle that I had been unwilling to face. Now, I couldn't look away. It was all right there in front of me, staring me in the face, years of manipulation, betrayal, and the deliberate stripping away of everything I had sacrificed for. I wasn't just angry, I was furious. But more than that, I was resolute. They had tried to rob me of my dignity, my future, and my life, and now I was going to make them pay. I looked across the desk at Sarah, who had been quietly watching me process the information. She was calm, methodical, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was on my side, someone who wasn't using me, someone who understood what I had been through. "We have everything we need," Sarah said, her voice a sharp contrast to the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "We're going to make sure they answer for this, but we need to move fast. This is about more than just the house now. It's about exposing the truth, about standing up for yourself, Michael." I nodded slowly, the words settling into my chest like a promise. This wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a fight for everything I had lost, everything I had given away to them, and everything they had taken from me. The days that followed felt like a blur, the weight of my decision pushing me forward with a newfound sense of purpose. I had already been through the motions of therapy, finding the space to heal and rebuild myself. But this was different. This was not about emotional recovery. This was about fighting for what I deserved and exposing the ugly truth behind the perfect family facade. We filed the papers with the court, prepared for battle. Sarah and I meticulously laid out the evidence, building a case that would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that my parents had exploited me. We had emails, bank records, texts, every little piece of the puzzle that would bring their carefully constructed house of lies crashing down. I could almost taste the victory, and it was sweet. Meanwhile, I continued to watch the drama unfold on social media. Ryan, ever the opportunist, had gone into overdrive, posting photos of himself and our parents at what seemed to be every possible family event. His captions were nauseatingly full of praise for our parents and his attempts to paint a picture of a flawless life. He made sure to emphasize how blessed he was, how his life was so perfect, all of it, funded by my hard work, my sacrifices, my pain. And there was Martha, too, playing the role of the concerned mother, posting passive-aggressive status updates about ungrateful children and trying to adjust to life. It was also transparent, but what they didn't know was that I was keeping track. I was watching, gathering everything I could to expose them for what they truly were. And when the time came, I would be ready. The day the court date arrived, I felt a strange calm. It was like everything that had happened had been leading up to this moment, and it was finally here. The gavel of justice would fall, and the truth would be exposed. My family, the people I had once believed I could count on, were about to lose everything. Not because of me, but because of the lies they had built their lives on. We walked into the courtroom together, Sarah and I, the weight of the case in our hands. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. The bright lights of the courtroom felt harsh and cold, but they illuminated the truth in a way that felt almost cleansing. My parents were sitting across from me, their faces tense, their expressions tight. Ryan was beside them, his usual cocky smile nowhere to be seen. There was only fear now, fear of being exposed, fear of facing the truth. The proceedings began, and the room was filled with a quiet tension as Sarah presented our case. Every piece of evidence we had gathered was laid out in front of the judge, who listened carefully, his expression unreadable. My parents sat silently, occasionally exchanging glances, but they knew it was over. Their perfect image was crumbling. Ryan, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to look anyone in the eye. The reality of the situation was setting in. He was just as culpable as my parents, and he could feel it, but there was no hiding from the truth now. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. His voice was firm, unwavering. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I find that the defendants have engaged in fraudulent behavior and have unjustly enriched themselves at the expense of their son. The court hereby grants Mr. Davies full possession of the property and orders restitution for the financial damages incurred. For a moment, the world stood still. The words hung in the air, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the house that I had reclaimed, it was my dignity. It was my life. I had fought for what was right, and I had won. But as I sat there, staring at my parents, I realized that the victory was not as sweet as I had imagined. There was no celebration, no triumphant moment of revenge. Just a deep, painful relief. I was free, but the cost had been high. As the court session ended, the real consequences of my parents' actions began to unfold. The bank would move forward with the foreclosure. But it wasn't just the house they were losing. They had spent years trying to maintain a perfect image, a perfect life, built on manipulation and exploitation. Now, that mask was shattered, and the world was finally seeing them for what they truly were. The legal fees, the restitution, the fines, they were a steep price to pay for their actions. But it wasn't just the financial cost. The public fallout was swift and brutal. My parents' reputation, which they had spent so long cultivating, disintegrated almost overnight. The whispers started at first quiet, then louder, as people began to piece together the true story. Family, friends, neighbors, acquaintances. Everyone who had once admired them began to question the facade they had built. Ryan, who had always been the golden child, now found himself exposed. His sense of entitlement, his arrogance, and his blatant manipulation were no longer hidden behind a veil of charm. He called me repeatedly, alternating between angry accusations and pathetic attempts at reconciliation. His voice was unrecognizable, desperate, pleading, but I remained silent. He had shown me who he really was, and now he was facing the consequences. In the days that followed, I stayed distant from the chaos. I had won, but there was no satisfaction in watching them crumble. The house, once a symbol of my sacrifice, was now a place I could finally call my own. But even as I stood there, looking at the empty rooms, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a burden that I had finally put down. But I couldn't ignore the truth. The truth was that this fight wasn't just about money, property, or revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my worth, and my sense of self. The house had been a symbol of everything I had given away, and now it was a symbol of my rebirth. I spent the next few weeks taking time for myself. I didn't rush into anything. I spent hours just walking through the house, letting the silence settle in. It was a new beginning. I wasn't just a man who had fought for what was his. I was a man who had finally found peace. I met with Sarah often, not to talk about the case, but to talk about life. She was a steady presence in the chaos, always offering words of encouragement, reminding me of my strength. And then there was Aunt Carol, who became a rock in my world. She was the first person who had ever truly listened, who had never judged me for the family I came from. Her visits became a lifeline, a reminder that family didn't have to be blood, it could be chosen. I began to rebuild. Slowly, carefully, I started working on projects I had abandoned. I took that backpacking trip to Europe I had promised myself years ago. I found joy in the small things, hiking in the mountains, spending time with people who truly saw me. And as for the house, it was mine, completely mine, a symbol of my freedom, my new life. It was no longer a place of manipulation and guilt. It was a place of peace, a place where I could finally be myself. But the journey was far from over. The battle had been won, but the scars of the past would always remain. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, they were part of me now, but they didn't define me. I had reclaimed my worth. I had taken back my life, and I wasn't done. The future was mine to build.